They called her broken, worthless. A woman too fat and too cursed to deserve love. After 3 years of marriage, Evelyn Mercer's own husband threw her into the dirt like garbage, blaming her for the children that never came. But when she fled west to the brutal frontier of Blackthorn Ridge and married a desperate widower with 2 grieving kids, something impossible happened. She got pregnant. Then her ex-husband came back with the law, claiming she still belonged to him. What happened next tore an entire valley apart. Stay until the end to see how this woman fought back. Drop a like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The worst part wasn't the shouting. Evelyn had gotten used to that years ago. It wasn't even the way Caleb Voss looked at her anymore, like she was some animal that had disappointed him one too many times. No, the worst part was the silence that came after, the kind of silence that felt like a grave closing over you while you were still breathing. She stood in the parlor of the house she'd scrubbed and maintained for 3 years, her hands still damp from the washing she'd been doing when Caleb's mother swept in like a storm in black silk. Margaret Voss had always been a cold woman, sharp as a blade and twice as cutting, but today there was something different in her eyes. Something final. "Pack your things," Margaret said. Not shouted, just stated it flat and plain like she was telling a servant to clear the dishes. Evelyn's heart kicked against her ribs. "What?" "You heard me." Margaret's thin lips barely moved. "You have until sundown to gather what's yours and leave this house." "I don't—" Evelyn's voice cracked. She hated how small she sounded. "I don't understand. Where's Caleb? I need to speak with him." "My son has nothing more to say to you." Margaret folded her arms across her chest, and the gesture was so dismissive it made Evelyn's stomach turn. 3 years, girl. 3 years of marriage and not one child, not even a miscarriage to show you tried. Do you know what people are saying about this family? That's not... Evelyn stopped herself. Her throat was closing up. It's not always the woman's fault. Sometimes... Don't you dare! Margaret's voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't you dare suggest my son is defective. The problem is standing right in front of me, taking up far too much space as it is. The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn knew what Margaret meant. She'd always known. She wasn't a small woman. Never had been. Back home in Missouri, her mother used to say she was sturdy or built for hard work, which was a kind way of saying she was fat. Here in Virginia, in Caleb's fine house with his fine family, there were no kind words, just stares, whispers. The way Caleb's friends' wives looked at her at church socials, their eyes sliding over her body with barely concealed disgust. "I've been a good wife," Evelyn said, and she hated how desperate she sounded. "I've kept this house. I've cooked and cleaned, and any hired girl could do that." Margaret waved a hand like she was shooing a fly. "Caleb married you for children, for heirs. You've given him nothing but embarrassment. Then let me speak to him, please." Evelyn took a step forward, and Margaret took a step back, as if being too close might be contagious. "If he wants to end this marriage, he should have the courage to tell me himself." For a moment, something flickered in Margaret's face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold certainty. "He's not here. He left this morning for Richmond. Asked me to handle this situation." She gestured vaguely at Evelyn. "So I am handling it. You have until sundown. Don't make me call the sheriff." Evelyn stood frozen as Margaret turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor Evelyn had polished just yesterday. The front door closed with a soft, final sound. For a long moment, Evelyn couldn't move, couldn't think. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the floor, her skirts pooling around her like a collapsed tent. 3 years. 3 years of trying to be good enough, of ignoring the comments, the looks, the way Caleb stopped touching her after the first year when no baby came, of pretending she didn't hear him and his mother talking in low voices about the problem and what to do about her. She told herself it would get better, that if she just tried harder, was quieter, took up less space somehow, they'd see her worth. She'd been lying to herself. The tears came then, hot and bitter. She pressed her hands over her face and let herself break, just for a moment, because once she started packing, there wouldn't be time for this. There wouldn't be room for grief when she had to figure out where the hell she was going to go. She had no family left. Her parents were dead. Her brother had moved to California 5 years ago, and she hadn't heard from him since. She had $23 saved from the small allowance Caleb gave her for household expenses. $23 and a trunk of clothes that didn't fit right anymore because Margaret insisted she eat less at dinner, in front of guests. By the time the sun started sinking toward the horizon, Evelyn had packed everything she owned into one trunk and a carpet bag. It wasn't much. 3 dresses, 2 shawls, some undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small book of pressed flowers she'd made during her first year of marriage, when she'd still been stupid enough to think she could make this place a home. She left the house through the back door. Couldn't bear to walk out the front like she'd done something wrong. The wagon she'd hired with the last of her money was waiting by the garden gate. The driver, an older black man named Samuel who worked in town, didn't ask questions, just loaded her trunk and helped her up onto the seat. "Where to, ma'am?" Evelyn opened her mouth and realized she had no answer. Where did women like her go? Back to Missouri, to beg for work as a seamstress or a washerwoman? To Richmond, to try to find factory work and starve on the wages? Then she remembered something. A poster she'd seen at the general store 3 months ago. One of those Western advertisements, all bold print and promises. "The train station," she said. "Please." Samuel nodded and clicked his tongue at the horses. At the station, Evelyn bought a ticket west with money she shouldn't have spent. The clerk barely looked at her. "Blackthorn Ridge," he said, stamping her ticket. "End of the line, mining country. You got people out there?" "Yes," Evelyn lied. She didn't have anyone, but that poster had said Blackthorn Ridge was looking for settlers, for families willing to work hard and build a life in rough country. It said there was land available, cheap, for those brave enough to take it. It didn't say anything about needing to be thin or fertile or good enough for someone like Caleb Voss. The train left at dawn. Evelyn sat by the window and watched Virginia disappear behind her, mile by mile, until there was nothing left but the future pressing in from all sides. Bamad. Blackthorn Ridge wasn't a town. Not really. It was a wound in the landscape carved out by desperate men looking for silver and finding just enough to keep them digging. The train deposited Evelyn and a handful of other travelers onto a platform made of raw lumber, and she stood there with her trunk at her feet, breathing in air that smelled like pine smoke and unwashed bodies. The town, if you could call it that, was a single dirt road lined with buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and never fixed. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, a building with a painted sign that said Assay Office, and another that said Doctor, but looked more like a storage shed. And people. Everywhere, people. Miners with dirt under their nails and exhaustion in their eyes. Women in faded calico dresses, their faces hard, in a way that came from surviving things Evelyn couldn't imagine. Children running half wild between the buildings, skinny and loud. This was a place where survival mattered more than manners. Evelyn could feel it in the air, in the way people looked at each other, not with judgment, but with assessment. Are you strong enough? Will you last the winter? She picked up her trunk, lighter than it should have been after 3 years of marriage, and started walking. She didn't know where she was going, just knew she had to look like she belonged, like she had a purpose, or someone would notice she was lost. The general store seemed like the safest bet. She pushed through the door and found herself in a cramped space that smelled like flour and tobacco. A woman stood behind the counter, maybe 40, with gray streaking through her brown hair and the kind of posture that said she didn't tolerate nonsense. "Help you?" the woman asked. Evelyn set her trunk down. "I'm looking for work, or land." The poster said, "You came out here on one of those settlement posters?" The woman's eyebrows went up. "Those are 2 years old, honey. Most of the good land's been claimed." Evelyn's heart sank. "Oh." The woman studied her for a long moment, then she sighed. "You got money?" "A little." "Family?" "No." "Husband?" Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. "Not anymore." Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not quite sympathy, more like recognition. "I'm Grace Holloway. I run this store with my husband. What's your name?" "Evelyn Mercer." "Well, Evelyn Mercer, you've got terrible timing." Grace leaned against the counter. "Winter's coming in about 6 weeks. If you don't have a place to stay by then, you'll freeze. And if you're planning to homestead by yourself, you'll starve before spring." "I can work," Evelyn said quickly. "I can cook, clean, sew." So can half the women in this valley, and most of them are already doing it for families that can barely feed themselves. Grace drummed her fingers on the counter. You need a husband. The word made Evelyn's stomach turn. No, I don't. Not a real one necessarily. Grace held up a hand. Just someone who needs help and has a roof. There's a few widowers up in the hills. Men with kids who need raising. It's not romantic, but it's practical. You'd have shelter, they'd have help. That's how most marriages work out here anyway. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to say she'd had one practical marriage and look how that ended. But Grace was right about one thing. She didn't have time to be proud. Winter was coming. She had nowhere to go. Is there anyone... Evelyn stopped, started again. Anyone who wouldn't mind that I can't have children? Grace's expression softened just slightly. That known for certain? 3 years of marriage and nothing. Evelyn lifted her chin. So yes, I think it's certain. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. There's a man named Silas Boone. Has a ranch about 8 miles north. Lost his wife last winter in a snowstorm. She went out to check on the livestock during a blizzard and never came back. Took them 2 days to find her body. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. That's awful. It's the frontier. Grace said it without emotion, just fact. He's got 2 kids. Girl about 10, boy maybe 7. He's been trying to manage alone, but it's not working. I heard him asking around town last month if anyone knew a woman who might be willing to help with the children. Not many takers. He's not an easy man, and those kids are half wild with grief. Why hasn't anyone helped him? Grace shrugged. People have their own problems, and Silas doesn't ask twice. He's got pride, even if he's drowning. Evelyn thought about it. Another marriage, another household to manage. But this time it would be honest, at least. Practical. No one would expect her to be something she wasn't. Could you introduce us? She asked. Grace smiled just a little. Come back tomorrow morning. I'll send word to him tonight. If he's interested, he'll be here. Silas Boone arrived at the general store just after dawn, and Evelyn knew who he was the moment he walked through the door. He was tall, taller than Caleb, broader in the shoulders, with the dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that looked like he'd stopped caring about it months ago. His clothes were clean but worn, patched in places. His hands were scarred and calloused. He looked like a man who'd been carved out of the landscape itself, hard and unyielding. He also looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep, that no amount of sleep would fix. Grace said you wanted to meet me, he said, his voice rough from disuse. Evelyn stood up from the chair where she'd been waiting. Yes, I'm Evelyn Mercer. He looked her over, quick and assessing. His eyes lingered on her face, her hands, her dress. Not with judgment, exactly, but like he was trying to figure out if she'd last through winter. You're the one looking for work. Yes. Grace said you were married before. I was. Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes. It didn't end well. He hit you? No, nothing like that. She took a breath. He decided I wasn't worth keeping. Something flickered in Silas's expression. Then he nodded, once. I've got 2 kids. Girl named Maisie, boy named Eli. The ranch is barely staying together. I need help with the house, the children, the animals. I can't pay wages, but I can offer room and board. And my name, if you want it. Legal marriage, practical. I can't have children, Evelyn said. Better to get it out now. 3 years of trying and nothing came of it. She waited for him to turn and walk away. For the dismissal. For the same look Caleb and Margaret had given her, like she was broken merchandise. Instead, Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Then help me protect the ones I already have. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. What? I don't need more children. His voice was flat, factual. I need someone to help me keep the 2 I've got alive through the winter. Someone to cook and clean and help Maisie understand she doesn't have to be the woman of the house at 10 years old. If you can do that, I don't care about the rest. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in 3 years. When? Evelyn asked. Today, if you're willing. Preacher comes through town once a month and he's leaving tomorrow. If we're doing this, it should be legal. He paused. I won't lie to you. It's not an easy life. The ranch is struggling. The kids are angry. I'm not good company. But you'll have a roof and food and I won't throw you out when things get hard. Evelyn thought about Caleb's house, about Margaret's cold dismissal, about the way she'd been made to feel like a burden for 3 years.
All right, she said. Let's do it.
They were married that afternoon in the preacher's tent with Grace and her husband as witnesses. The ceremony took 5 minutes. Silas put a plain iron band on her finger, his late wife's ring, she realized, and tried not to think too hard about that. The preacher pronounced them man and wife. Silas shook his hand, thanked him, and that was it. "We should head back before dark," Silas said. "It's an hour ride and the kids don't know yet." Evelyn climbed onto the wagon bench beside him, her trunk loaded in the back. They rode in silence through the valley, following a rough track that wound between stands of pine and scrub oak. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh way, all rocks and hard earth and sky that went on forever. "Tell me about them," Evelyn said finally. "Your children." Silas didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the trail. "Maisie's tough. Too tough for her age. She took over running the house after her mother died, and she doesn't trust easy. Eli's quiet. Cries at night sometimes, but won't talk about it. They both—" He stopped. Started again. "They both loved their mother. Don't expect them to love you." "I won't." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not here to replace her. I'm just here to help." Silas nodded once, sharp. "Good." The Boone Ranch appeared as the sun started sinking, a rough collection of buildings huddled against the base of a hill. The main house was small, log-built, with a sagging porch and a chimney that was missing stones. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a pen for livestock. Everything looked like it was barely holding together. A girl stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them approach. She was small and wiry, with dark hair pulled back in a braid, wearing a dress that was too short and boots that were too big. Her face was set in an expression that reminded Evelyn of Margaret Voss, cold and closed and furious. "That's Maisie," Silas said quietly. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. Evelyn followed, her legs shaky from the ride. "Maisie, this is Evelyn," Silas said. "She's going to be staying with us." Maisie's eyes swept over Evelyn, head to toe, and there was nothing childlike in that look. It was pure assessment, and it came up wanting. "You got married?" It wasn't a question. Somehow the girl had known. Silas didn't deny it. "Yes." "You didn't ask us." "I'm telling you now." "Where's she going to sleep?" Maisie's voice was flat, but Evelyn could hear the anger underneath. "Mama's room?" "That's my room," Silas said quietly. "And yes, that's how marriage works." "It's been less than a year." Maisie's hands were clenched into fists. "Mama's not even cold, and you replaced her." "Watch your mouth." Silas's voice went hard. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know you brought home some stranger—" "Enough!" Silas stepped forward, and Maisie went quiet, but the fury in her eyes didn't fade. "Go inside. Help your brother with supper." Maisie stared at her father for another long moment. Then she turned and stalked into the house, letting the door slam behind her. Silas stood there, his shoulders rigid. Then he let out a long breath. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Evelyn said. "She's protecting her mother. I understand that. She's 10 years old. She shouldn't have to—" He stopped, shook his head. "Come on, I'll show you the house." Inside was worse than Evelyn expected. The house was clean, or had been once, but there was a layer of neglect over everything. Dishes piled in the basin, laundry hanging on a line strung across the main room, a pot of something boiling on the stove that smelled burned. Maisie stood by the fire, stirring it with mechanical precision, her face set. A small boy sat at the table, watching Evelyn with huge, wary eyes. "Eli," Silas said, "this is Evelyn. She's going to be living here now." Eli didn't respond, just kept staring. "Say hello," Silas prompted. "Hello," Eli whispered. Evelyn tried to smile. "Hello, Eli. It's nice to meet you." No response. The boy looked down at the table. "I'll show you the bedroom," Silas said. He led her through a narrow doorway into a small room barely big enough for the bed and a chest of drawers. There was a quilt on the bed, handmade, beautiful, a woman's touch. His late wife's work, probably. "You can put your things in here," Silas said. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Give you time to settle. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his eyes were tired. This is already hard enough. We'll figure out the rest later. He left her alone. Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the quilt. Somewhere in the other room she could hear Maisie's voice, low and angry, and Silas responding in tones too quiet to make out. She'd traded one impossible situation for another, a cold mansion for a struggling ranch, a husband who despised her for one who was too buried in grief to see her, a mother-in-law who hated her for children who would probably do the same. But at least here, she had a chance. At least here, no one expected her to be anything but useful. It was more than she'd had in Virginia. The first week was a nightmare. Evelyn woke before dawn, same as she'd done in Caleb's house. But here there was no quiet routine. Instead, there was chaos. The chickens needed feeding, the cow needed milking, the fire needed building, breakfast needed making. And through it all, Maisie watched her with those cold, assessing eyes, waiting for her to fail. Evelyn burned the first batch of biscuits. Maisie didn't say anything, just scraped them into the slop bucket and made more herself, quick and efficient, like she'd done it 1,000 times. "I can do that," Evelyn said. "I've got it." Maisie didn't look at her. At supper, Eli refused to sit next to Evelyn. He pressed himself against his father's side and wouldn't speak when she tried to talk to him. Silas ate in silence, his focus on his plate. The only sound was the scrape of forks and the crackle of the fire. Afterward, Maisie cleared the dishes without being asked. "I'll wash up." "I can help," Evelyn offered. "Don't need help." "Maisie," Silas's voice was tired. "Let her help." "Why?" Maisie turned to face her father, her small hands gripping the edge of the counter. "She doesn't know how we do things here. She'll just get in the way." "Then teach her." Maisie's jaw clenched. For a moment, Evelyn thought the girl might actually refuse. Then she jerked her head toward the basin. "Water's in the bucket, soap's on the shelf. Don't waste it." Evelyn washed dishes while Maisie dried, and the silence between them was thick enough to choke on. When they finished, Maisie hung the towel with sharp, angry movements and walked away without a word. That night, Evelyn lay in the bed that still smelled faintly of lavender, his late wife's scent probably, and listened to the sounds of the house settling. Somewhere outside, she could hear Silas moving around in the barn. He'd kept his promise, hadn't tried to share the bed, hadn't touched her at all. She should have been relieved. Instead, she just felt alone. In the morning, she got up and started again. It took Evelyn 2 weeks to understand the rhythm of the Boone household, and another week after that to realize she'd never fully be part of it. The family ran like a machine with missing parts, grinding along, barely functional, always on the edge of breaking down completely. Silas left before dawn most days, working the ranch alone because he couldn't afford help. He came back after dark, exhausted, and ate whatever Maisie had made without comment. He was never cruel, never raised his voice, but he was absent in the way that men got when grief had hollowed them out. Maisie ran the house like a sergeant. She woke Eli, dressed him, fed him, walked him through his chores. She cooked every meal, washed every dish, mended every piece of clothing. She did it all with grim determination, like she was holding the entire world together through sheer will. And she refused to let Evelyn help with any of it. "I need to check the smokehouse inventory," Evelyn said one morning. "Already did it." Maisie didn't look up from the bread she was kneading. "The chicken coop needs mucking out." "I'll get to it this afternoon." "Maisie, I'm trying to—" "I said I'll handle it." The girl's hands moved faster, punching down the dough with more force than necessary. "We've been fine without you. We'll keep being fine." Evelyn stood there, useless, while a 10-year-old girl did the work of a grown woman. It was wrong, all of it, but she didn't know how to fix it. Eli was easier in some ways, harder in others. He didn't openly refuse her like Maisie did. He just went quiet whenever she entered a room, his eyes tracking her like she was something dangerous. At meals he sat pressed against his father's side, picking at his food, never speaking unless spoken to. One afternoon, Evelyn found him sitting by the barn, crying. She approached slowly, careful. "Eli, are you hurt?" He shook his head but didn't look at her. "Can I sit with you?" He shrugged. Evelyn took that as permission and lowered herself onto the ground beside him, her skirt spreading around her. For a long time they sat in silence. Then very quietly, Eli said, "I miss Mama." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I know." She used to sing, in the mornings when she made breakfast. Pa says I'm not supposed to be sad anymore because it makes him sad too. Your pa didn't say that, Evelyn said gently.
He doesn't have to. I can see it. Eli wiped his nose on his sleeve. Maisie says you're here to take Mama's place, but you're not like her. You're too... He stopped. Evelyn waited, her heart beating too hard. Too big, Eli finished, and his voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, just observational. Mama was small. She could fit in places. You can't. Evelyn felt the familiar shame rise up, hot and bitter. But she pushed it down. You're right. I'm not like your mama. I'm not here to replace her. I'm just here to help. That's what Pa said. Eli looked at her finally, his eyes red. But Maisie says you'll try to make us forget. I won't. Evelyn met his gaze. I promise. You can love your mama and still let me help. Those aren't the same thing. Eli thought about that. Then he nodded, just once, and went back to staring at the ground. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mines. The town of Blackthorn Ridge noticed the new Mrs. Boone within days, and what they noticed wasn't kind. Evelyn made her first trip to the general store 3 weeks after the wedding, and she felt the weight of every stare from the moment she walked through the door. Grace was behind the counter again. She smiled, but it was tight. Evelyn, how are you settling in? Fine, thank you. Evelyn set her shopping list on the counter. I need flour, salt, and coffee if you have it. I've got it. Grace started gathering supplies, then, lower. People are talking. Let them. They're saying Silas married beneath him, that you're not... Grace stopped, started again. That you're not what they expected. Evelyn felt her face heat. Because I'm fat. Because you're new and different, and people here don't trust different. Grace wrapped the flour in paper. But yes, some of them are saying that too. Behind her, Evelyn heard a voice, low, female, dripping with false concern. Poor Silas, first he loses Helen, and now he's saddled with that. Can you imagine? Another voice responded, just as low. I heard she couldn't give her first husband children. Why would Silas want damaged goods? Evelyn's hands clenched, but she didn't turn around, didn't give them the satisfaction. Grace, however, turned and fixed the women with a look that could have frozen water. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Cole, if you've got something to say it to her face. Silence. That's what I thought. Grace turned back to Evelyn. Don't let them get to you. But they already had. Poetique. That night at supper, Silas noticed her silence. Something wrong? Evelyn pushed food around her plate. Just tired. You went into town today. It wasn't a question. Yes. He waited. When she didn't continue, he said, People talk, don't listen. That's easy for you to say. The words came out sharper than she intended. You're not the one they're whispering about. Maisie looked up from her plate, interested now. Eli went very still. Silas set down his fork. What did they say? Does it matter? Evelyn stood, her chair scraping against the floor. They think you married beneath you. They think I'm wrong. Too big, too barren, too much of everything bad and not enough of anything good. Same as my last husband thought, same as everyone thinks. She was shaking. She hadn't meant to say any of it. Silas stood too. Listen to me. I don't care what those people think. I married you because I needed help and you needed a home. That's the arrangement. If they don't like it, they can keep their opinions to themselves. But they won't. Evelyn's voice cracked. They never do. And eventually you'll start believing them too, just like, I'm not him. Silas's voice cut across hers, sharp and final. Whoever he was, whatever he did to you, I'm not him. I keep my word. We made an arrangement. I'm going to honor it. End of discussion. He walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Evelyn stood there, trembling. When she finally looked down, she found both children staring at her. Maisie's expression was unreadable. Eli just looked scared. I'm sorry, Evelyn whispered. I shouldn't have. But Maisie was already getting up, clearing plates with sharp, angry movements. Eli followed his sister like a shadow, and Evelyn was alone again. That night she lay in the lavender-scented bed and tried not to cry. She'd been stupid to think this place would be different. People were people,
whether in Virginia or the frontier. They'd always find something wrong with her, always find a reason to whisper. And maybe they were right. Maybe she was the problem. Maybe she'd always be too much and not enough, all at the same time. Outside, she heard Silas's footsteps coming back from the barn. They paused outside the door. For a long moment, he stood there, and Evelyn held her breath, wondering if he'd come in, if he'd finally admit he'd made a mistake. But then the footsteps moved away toward the barn again, and she was alone in the dark. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains like something with teeth. The first snow fell in mid-October, just a dusting that melted by noon, but it was a warning. Evelyn felt it in her bones, the way the air turned sharp, the way the animals grew skittish, the way Silas started working longer hours, his face drawn with worry every time he came in from the fields. The ranch wasn't ready. Anyone could see that. The barn roof had holes that needed patching. The smokehouse was half empty. The firewood pile was maybe a third of what it should have been. And there were only 4 of them to do the work of 6. Evelyn started getting up earlier, before the children, before Silas. She'd build the fire, start the coffee, begin breakfast. By the time Maisie stumbled out of the room, she shared with Eli, there'd be biscuits in the oven and bacon frying. The first few mornings, Maisie just stood there in her nightgown, staring at Evelyn like she'd committed some kind of crime. "I can do that," Maisie said finally, on the 4th morning. "I know you can." Evelyn flipped the bacon. "But you don't have to do everything. Mama always, your mama isn't here." The words came out harder than Evelyn intended. She softened her voice. "I'm not trying to replace her, Maisie. I'm just trying to help. That's all." Maisie's face closed up. "I don't need help." "Yes, you do." Evelyn turned to face her. "You're 10 years old. You shouldn't be carrying this whole house on your shoulders." "Someone has to. That someone is me now." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. "You can hate me if you want. You can ignore me, refuse to talk to me, whatever makes you feel better. But I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to stand by and watch a child kill herself trying to be a grown woman." Maisie's eyes went bright with tears she refused to shed. "You don't know anything about us." "Then teach me." They stared at each other across the kitchen. Then Eli appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and the moment broke. Maisie turned away, her shoulders rigid, and Evelyn went back to the stove. It wasn't peace, but it was something. Silas noticed the change at breakfast. He looked at the table, the food already laid out, the coffee poured, and then at Evelyn. "You didn't have to do all this." "I live here," Evelyn said simply. "Of course I did." He nodded slowly and sat down. The children followed, Eli still half asleep, Maisie watching Evelyn with wary eyes. They ate in silence for a while. Then Silas said, "I'm going to need help this week getting the rest of the hay in. Storm's coming, probably by Friday. If we don't get it done, the livestock won't make it through winter." "I can help," Evelyn said. Maisie's head snapped up. "You don't know how to—" "Then I'll learn." Evelyn met her eyes. "I've got 2 hands and a working back. Show me what to do and I'll do it." Silas looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. "All right. We start after breakfast." Maisie opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but something in her father's expression stopped her. She went back to her food, her jaw clenched. That afternoon, Evelyn learned what hard work really meant. Haying wasn't complicated. Cut the grass, let it dry, bundle it, stack it in the barn, but it was brutal. The scythe was heavy and awkward in her hands. Her back screamed after the first hour. Her palms blistered after the second. By the time the sun started sinking, every muscle in her body was on fire. But she didn't stop. She kept swinging the scythe, kept bundling the hay, kept dragging loads to the barn. Silas worked beside her, steady and methodical, not talking much but occasionally correcting her form. Maisie worked too, smaller and faster, her movements sharp with barely contained anger. When they finally stopped for the day, Evelyn's hands were bleeding. She tried to hide it, wrapping them in her apron, but Silas saw. "Let me see," he said. "It's fine." "It's not fine, let me see." She held out her hands. The blisters had burst, leaving raw, weeping skin. Silas studied them for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, "Come on." He led her to the pump, worked the handle until cold water gushed out, and held her hands under it. Evelyn hissed at the sting but didn't pull away. When the worst of the dirt was gone, he wrapped her palms in clean cloth torn from an old shirt. "You should have said something," he told her.
Would you have stopped working? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. No, he admitted. I wouldn't have. Then neither would I. For a moment they just stood there, and Evelyn felt something pass between them. Not affection exactly, more like recognition, like he was seeing her for the first time as something other than an obligation. Then Maisie called from the house. Supper was ready, and the moment ended. That night Evelyn's hands hurt too much to sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around her, and thought about the look in Silas's eyes. He was starting to see her, not as a replacement for his dead wife, not as a burden, just as a person trying her best in an impossible situation. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had before. The storm hit 2 days later, just like Silas predicted. It came down in sheets, turning the world outside gray and cold. They'd gotten the hay in just in time. The livestock were secured, the house was battened down. There was nothing to do but wait it out. Evelyn spent the day cooking. She made bread, soup, a pot of beans that would last them through the worst of it. Maisie helped without being asked, moving around the kitchen in her usual efficient silence. Eli sat by the fire with a battered book, reading the same page over and over like he couldn't quite focus. Silas came in around midday, soaked through. Barn roofs holding, checked the animals, everyone settled. Good. Evelyn ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to him. Sit, you're freezing. He sat, ate, warmed his hands by the fire. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows, relentless. How long will it last? Evelyn asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Silas stared into the fire. Then we'll have a week or so before the next one. After that, it's just winter until March. That's a long time. That's the frontier. He said it without emotion, just fact. You get used to it. Evelyn wasn't sure she would, but she nodded anyway. That night they all ate together in the main room, huddled close to the fire. The rain was louder now, battering the roof, and every so often the wind would howl through gaps in the walls. Eli pressed against his father's side, his eyes wide. Tell us a story, Pa, he said quietly. Silas looked uncomfortable. I'm not good at stories. Mama used to... Eli stopped, his face crumpled. Maisie's hand shot out and grabbed her brother's. Don't, she said, her voice sharp. Don't think about it. But Eli was already crying, silent tears streaming down his face. Maisie pulled him close, her own eyes bright with tears she wouldn't shed, and Evelyn felt her chest tighten. I know a story, she said quietly. They all looked at her. Maisie's expression was hostile. Silas's was wary, but Eli's was hopeful. It's about a girl who lived in a place where it rained all the time, Evelyn began. So much rain that everyone forgot what the sun looked like. They lived in dark houses and ate cold food and wore gray clothes, and they were miserable. But the girl refused to be miserable. Every day she'd paint pictures of the sun on the walls of her house. Big, bright, yellow suns. Her parents thought she was crazy. Her neighbors thought she was foolish, but she kept painting them anyway. Eli wiped his eyes. Did the sun come back? Not right away. Evelyn kept her voice gentle. But every time someone walked past her house and saw those paintings, they'd smile. Just a little. Just enough to remember that the sun existed. And after a while, other people started painting suns too. On their doors, their fences, their windows. The whole town was covered in them. And when the rain finally stopped and the sun did come out, everyone said it was because of the girl. But really, it was because they'd never stopped believing it was possible. The room was quiet except for the rain. Then Eli said, I like that story. Good. Evelyn smiled at him. I'll tell you another one tomorrow. Maisie didn't say anything, but when Evelyn glanced over, the girl's expression had softened, just slightly. It wasn't acceptance, but it was less hostility, and that was something. The storm broke on the 3rd day, leaving the world washed clean and freezing cold. Silas went out to assess the damage. Evelyn followed, bundled in a shawl that didn't do much against the wind. The ranch looked worse in the daylight. One section of fence had collapsed. The chicken coop door had blown open, and 3 chickens were missing, probably taken by predators. The vegetable garden was a mess of broken stalks and mud. We'll need to repair the fence before the next storm, Silas said, and I need to ride into town for supplies. We're low on kerosene and salt. I can come with you, Evelyn offered. He looked at her, considering, then nodded. All right, we'll leave after breakfast. The ride into Blackthorn Ridge was cold and quiet.
Silas wasn't much for conversation, and Evelyn was too busy trying to keep warm to force it. When they finally reached town, she was grateful to climb down from the wagon and stretch her frozen legs. Grace was behind the counter at the general store again. She smiled when she saw them. Silas? Evelyn. Glad to see you made it through the storm. Barely. Silas handed her a list. Need these when you have a chance. Grace scanned the list and nodded. Give me a few minutes. I'll get it together. While Silas discussed something about feed prices, Evelyn wandered toward the back of the store where bolts of fabric were stacked. She ran her hand over a piece of blue calico, soft and faded. It would make a nice dress for Maisie. The girl's clothes were all too small, worn through at the elbows and knees. That's pretty. Evelyn turned. A woman stood beside her, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a tired smile. I'm Sarah Bennett. I live a few miles south of you. Evelyn Boone. Evelyn felt the automatic tension rise up. Another woman, another chance to be judged. But Sarah just nodded. I heard Silas got married. Surprised everyone, to be honest. He's not exactly the social type. No, he's not. How are you settling in? Sarah picked up a spool of thread, examining it. Those kids giving you trouble? Evelyn hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than lies. Maisie hates me. Eli's scared of me. And Silas barely talks to me unless it's about chores. Sarah laughed, but it wasn't cruel. Sounds about right. Helen, that was his first wife, she was one of my closest friends. We came out here together, actually. Got married the same year. She was a good woman, strong. Those kids loved her something fierce. I'm not trying to replace her, Evelyn said quietly. I know, Sarah set down the thread. But they don't know that yet. Give them time. And don't let the town gossips get to you. Half of them are miserable anyway, and they're just looking for someone new to talk about. Is it that obvious? That you've been getting grief? Sarah smiled sadly. Honey, you're new, you're different, and you married a man everyone thinks is too good for you. Of course they're talking. But talking's all they can do. You're not hurting anyone. You're just trying to survive, same as the rest of us. Something in Evelyn's chest loosened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first real winter. Sarah squeezed her arm. But if you need anything, someone to talk to, help with the kids, whatever, I'm just down the road. Come by sometime. It was the first genuine kindness Evelyn had received from another woman in this valley. She nodded, not trusting her voice. When Silas finished loading the supplies, they headed back. Halfway home, he said, You were talking to Sarah Bennett. Yes, she seems nice. She is. Silas was quiet for a moment. She and Helen were close. If she's willing to be friendly with you, that's good. Means she doesn't see you as a threat. A threat to what? To Helen's memory. He said it simply, like it was obvious. A lot of people in this valley still think of Helen as Blackthorn Ridge's saint. The woman who never complained, never failed, never showed weakness. They put her on a pedestal and now they're angry that I moved on. It's been less than a year, Evelyn pointed out. I know. His jaw tightened. But I've got 2 kids who need raising and a ranch that's falling apart. I couldn't wait for people's approval. I had to do what was practical. Practical. That word again. It was starting to feel like a cage. Do you regret it? Evelyn asked. Marrying me? Silas looked at her then, his expression unreadable. Ask me again in spring. It wasn't the reassurance she'd been hoping for, but it was honest, and she could respect that. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Not comfortable exactly, but predictable. Evelyn worked from before dawn until after dark, cooking, cleaning, mending, tending the animals, helping Silas with the endless repairs the ranch needed. Maisie slowly, grudgingly, started accepting her help. Eli stopped flinching when she got too close. Silas remained distant but fair, treating her like a business partner rather than a wife. It was a lonely existence, but it was better than being thrown out with nothing. Then, one afternoon in late November, everything changed. Evelyn was in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough, when a wave of nausea hit her so hard she had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. She stood there, breathing through her mouth, waiting for it to pass. When it finally did, she went back to kneading. The nausea came back the next morning. And the morning after that. By the fourth day, Evelyn couldn't deny what was happening anymore. She was pregnant. It wasn't possible. 3 years of marriage to Caleb and nothing, not even a scare. The doctor he'd taken her to had been blunt. Some women just couldn't conceive, and she was probably one of them. She'd accepted that, built her entire identity around it. But her body was telling her something different now. She didn't tell anyone at first. Couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. What if she was wrong? What if it was just illness, stress, bad food? What if she said something and then lost the baby, and everyone looked at her with that same disappointed disgust Caleb had perfected? But the nausea continued. Her breast grew tender. She was exhausted all the time, falling asleep after supper like she'd been drugged. And she missed her monthly bleeding, which had always been regular as clockwork. By December, she couldn't hide it anymore. She told Silas one evening after the children had gone to bed. They were sitting by the fire, him mending a harness, her darning socks. The words felt impossible to say. "I need to tell you something," she started. He looked up. "All right. I think—" She stopped. Tried again. "I'm pregnant." The harness fell from Silas's hands. He stared at her, his face gone completely blank. "What?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated, and her voice shook. "I know I said I couldn't. I know that's not what you wanted, but I— How long?" "I don't know exactly. 2 months, maybe? I didn't realize at first, and then I wasn't sure, and— Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor." Silas stood up, paced to the window, paced back. His face was unreadable, but his body was tense, coiled. "This changes things." "I know." Evelyn twisted the sock in her hands. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful." "Careful?" He turned to look at her. "We haven't— I've been sleeping in the barn. How could you be more careful?" Heat flooded Evelyn's face. "I know. I just meant— This is my fault. I told you I was barren and I was wrong, and now— Stop." Silas crossed to her, knelt down so they were eye level. "Stop apologizing. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just life." "Are you angry?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "Whoa, no." Surprised, worried, but not angry. "Worried about what?" His eyes went dark. "Helen died in childbirth with Eli. Nearly bled to death. She was sick for months after. And then when she got pregnant again 2 years later, she lost the baby at 4 months and almost died again. That's when the doctor told her she couldn't have more children, that it would kill her." Evelyn's breath caught. "I didn't know. I don't talk about it." Silas stood up, started pacing again. "She was never the same after that. Got fragile, weak. And then last winter when she went out in that storm—" He stopped. "She wasn't thinking straight. Hadn't been for months. And I didn't see it because I was too busy trying to keep this place running. Silas, if something happens to you—" His voice cracked. "If you die because of this, those kids will blame me. And they'll be right to." Evelyn stood up and crossed to him. She put her hand on his arm and felt him flinch, but he didn't pull away. "I'm not Helen. I'm strong, healthy. I've never had problems with bleeding or weakness. This is different. You don't know that. Neither do you." She made him look at her. "But we can't change it now. It's happening. All we can do is get through it together." Silas searched her face, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real fear in his eyes. "I can't lose another wife." "You won't," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "I promise." It was a promise she had no business making, but she made it anyway. The pregnancy changed everything in the house. Maisie figured it out within days. She was too observant to miss the signs. Evelyn caught her staring one morning while they were doing dishes, her eyes fixed on Evelyn's stomach. "Are you sick?" Maisie asked. "No." "Then why do you keep throwing up?" Evelyn set down the plate she was washing. "Because I'm going to have a baby." Maisie's face went white, then red. Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen without a word. Evelyn found her an hour later, sitting behind the barn, crying. Not the silent tears Maisie usually allowed herself, but real sobs that shook her thin shoulders. Evelyn sat down beside her and waited. "You're replacing us," Maisie finally choked out. "That's why you came here. To have babies with Pa and push me and Eli out. That's not true. Yes, it is. Maisie scrubbed at her face with her sleeve. You'll have a real baby. Your baby. And Pa will love it more than us because it's yours and you're just the children he would die for, Evelyn said quietly. Do you really think one baby is going to change that? It did before. Maisie's voice was small now, broken. When Mama got pregnant with Eli, she changed. She loved him more than me, I could tell. And then when she got pregnant again and lost the baby, she stopped being happy, stopped being Mama. And then she died, and it was my fault because I wasn't enough to make her want to stay. Oh, Maisie, Evelyn's throat closed up. That wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. Then whose fault was it? Maisie looked at her with eyes too old for her face. Someone has to be blamed. Sometimes there's no one to blame. Sometimes bad things just happen. Evelyn reached out slowly and took Maisie's hand. The girl didn't pull away. Your mama didn't leave because of you. She left because she was sick and the weather was bad and she made a choice that seemed right at the time. And your pa doesn't love Eli more than you. He loves you both. Desperately. Anyone can see that. But the new baby, the new baby will be loved too, Evelyn said. But not more. Not instead of. Just also. Love doesn't work like that, Maisie. It doesn't get divided up into smaller pieces. It just grows bigger. Maisie stared at her, tears still streaming down her face. You promise? I promise. It was the second promise Evelyn had made that she wasn't sure she could keep. But looking at Maisie's face, at the desperate hope there, she knew she'd do everything in her power to make it true. That night at supper, Eli asked, Is it true there's going to be a baby? Silas nodded. Yes. Will it be a boy or a girl? We won't know until it's born. Eli thought about that. Then he said, If it's a girl, can we name her after Mama? The room went very quiet. Silas's jaw tightened. Maisie stared at her plate. Evelyn felt something twist in her chest. We'll see, Silas said finally. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Everything was changing so fast. The pregnancy, Maisie's tentative acceptance, Eli's cautious questions. Even Silas was different, more protective, more present, checking on her constantly to make sure she was resting enough, eating enough, not working too hard. For the first time since leaving Virginia, Evelyn felt like she might actually belong somewhere, like she might actually build a life that was hers. But there was a fear underneath it all, a whisper that said this was too good, that something would go wrong, that she'd lose it all just when she finally had something worth keeping. She pressed her hand to her stomach, where the baby was growing so small she couldn't even feel it yet, and made another silent promise. She would protect this family, all of them, no matter what it cost. The baby showed itself properly in January, when the world outside was frozen solid, and the days were so short it felt like living in perpetual twilight. Evelyn's belly rounded out, unmistakable now, and she caught Silas staring at it sometimes with an expression she couldn't read. Not quite fear anymore. Something closer to wonder mixed with dread. She was in the kitchen one morning trying to knead bread despite the fact that her back was killing her, when Maisie came in and took the dough right out of her hands. You're supposed to be resting, the girl said. I've been resting all morning. You've been working since before dawn. I saw you. Maisie's tone was sharp, but there was something else underneath it now. Concern, maybe. Pa said you're not supposed to overdo it. Your pa worries too much. He worries the right amount. Maisie started kneading with practiced efficiency. Mama didn't rest enough when she was pregnant with Eli. She kept working right up until she went into labor, and then she almost died. Pa told me about it. He doesn't want that to happen again. Evelyn sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Her ankles were swollen and her feet hurt, and she was tired in a way that went deeper than just needing sleep. I'm not going to die, Maisie. You don't know that. Neither do you. Evelyn watched the girl work, her small hands moving with the kind of competence that came from years of necessity. Has your father been talking to you about this? He talks to me about everything. Maisie punched down the dough. I'm the oldest. I need to know things in case something happens. Nothing's going to happen. Maisie looked at her then, and her eyes were older than they should have been. That's what Mama said too. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn wanted to argue, to promise, to make guarantees she had no business making, but she'd already made too many promises. So instead she just said, "I'm going to try my best to stay alive. For you and Eli and your father, and for this baby. That's all I can do." Maisie nodded slowly. Then she went back to the bread, and they didn't speak about it again. Eli was different. He'd started following Evelyn around the house, watching her with those big, solemn eyes, occasionally reaching out to touch her belly like he was checking to make sure the baby was still there. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the floor beside her chair, building a tower out of wooden blocks Silas had carved years ago. "What are you making?" she asked. "A house." He placed another block carefully. "For the baby, so it has somewhere to live when it comes out." Evelyn's chest tightened. "That's very thoughtful. Maisie says babies are loud, and they cry a lot, and they smell bad." He frowned at his tower. "But I think I'll like it anyway." "I think you will too." "Will you still tell me stories after the baby comes?" "Of course I will." "Promise?" "I promise." Another promise. She was collecting them like debts. Eli seemed satisfied with that. He went back to building his tower, and Evelyn watched him, this small, serious boy who'd lost so much already and was trying so hard to be brave about it. That night when Silas came in from the barn, stamping snow off his boots, Evelyn was waiting with hot coffee and the question she'd been holding on to for weeks. "Are you ever going to sleep in this house again?" she asked. He stopped mid-motion, one boot half off. "What? You've been sleeping in the barn since the day we got married. I know you're trying to be respectful or whatever, but it's the middle of winter and you're going to freeze to death out there." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted and you're cold and you're barely sleeping because that barn isn't insulated, worth a damn." She set the coffee down harder than necessary. "I'm pregnant, Silas. We're having a baby together. I think we can share a bed without it being the end of the world." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down and pulled off the other boot. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me. This marriage was supposed to be practical. An arrangement. You help with the kids, I give you a home. That was the deal." "And?" Evelyn crossed her arms. "What's changed?" "Everything." He scrubbed his hands over his face. "You're pregnant. That wasn't part of the plan. And now every time I look at you, I think about Helen, about how I failed her, about how I couldn't protect her when it mattered. If something happens to you, it won't." "You don't know that." His voice cracked. "Helen was strong too. She survived 2 difficult pregnancies and everyone said she was tough as nails. And then she just wasn't. She got sick and she never got better, and then she died in a snowstorm because I wasn't paying attention." Evelyn moved closer to him. "You can't save everyone, Silas. Sometimes people die and it's not anyone's fault. It's just bad luck and bad timing and a world that doesn't care how hard we try." "I know that." He looked up at her and his eyes were red-rimmed. "But knowing it doesn't make it easier." "No, it doesn't." She held out her hand. "But punishing yourself by sleeping in a freezing barn doesn't make it easier either. It just makes you miserable and tired and not much use to anyone." He stared at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it and let her pull him to his feet. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Silas Boone slept in his own bed. He stayed on his side, careful not to touch her, but he was there, and that was something. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday in late February, riding into Blackthorn Ridge on a horse that was too fine for frontier country. Evelyn was in town with Maisie, buying supplies, when she heard the commotion outside the general store. "Who's that?" someone asked. "Don't know. Looks like money, though." Evelyn glanced out the window, and her blood went cold. She knew that horse, knew that coat, knew the way the man sat in the saddle like he owned everything he looked at. Caleb Voss had come to Blackthorn Ridge. She grabbed Maisie's arm harder than she meant to. "We need to go, right now." "What? Why?" Maisie tried to pull away. "We haven't finished." "Now, Maisie." Something in Evelyn's voice must have gotten through because the girls stopped arguing. They gathered their supplies quickly and headed for the door, but they weren't fast enough. Caleb was already dismounting, already turning toward the store, and then his eyes landed on Evelyn, and everything stopped. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the street. "Evelyn Mercer, I've been looking for you." Evelyn's throat closed. "It's Evelyn Boone now." "Is it?" He walked toward her with that same easy confidence he'd always had,
like the world would simply arrange itself to suit him. I'm not so sure about that. What are you doing here? I came to talk to you, to fix this misunderstanding. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Surely we can discuss this like reasonable people. Maisie pressed closer to Evelyn's side. Who is this? No one, Evelyn said. We're leaving.
But Caleb stepped into their path. Now, that's not very friendly. I've ridden a long way to find you. The least you could do is hear me out. People were starting to gather now, curious and hungry for drama. Evelyn felt trapped, exposed. There's nothing to discuss. We were married. You threw me out. I came here and married someone else. It's done. Except it's not done. Caleb pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is the original filing from our divorce proceedings. Or rather, what should have been the filing. Turns out there was an error. The clerk never properly recorded it, which means, legally speaking, you and I are still married. The world tilted. That's not possible. I'm afraid it is. I had a lawyer look into it. The divorce was never finalized, which means your marriage to this Boone fellow is invalid. He looked at her stomach, at the swell of pregnancy that couldn't be hidden now, and something ugly flickered in his expression. And that child you're carrying, legally mine. Evelyn couldn't breathe, couldn't think. You're lying. I'm not. And I have the documents to prove it. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you can fight this. But you can't. The law is very clear. You're still my wife. That baby is still my child. And if you try to resist, I'll have the sheriff escort you back to Virginia in chains if I have to. Why? The word came out broken. Why are you doing this? You didn't want me. Your mother threw me out like garbage. Why come back now? Caleb's jaw tightened. Because I made a mistake. I let my mother convince me that the problem was you when the problem was clearly me. I've since remarried, a lovely woman, very proper, and she also has failed to conceive, which means the issue was never with you. It was with me. The admission seemed to cost him something. So I need you to come home. We'll say you had a nervous breakdown and ran away, but now you're recovered and we're reconciling. The baby will legitimize my name, prove I'm capable of producing an heir. Everyone gets what they need. Evelyn stared at him in horror. You're insane. I'm practical. He said it like it was a virtue. This doesn't have to be difficult, Evelyn. Come home quietly, and I'll make sure your frontier family isn't harmed. Fight me, and I'll see to it that Boone loses his ranch, his children, and possibly his freedom for harboring another man's wife. You can't. My short sour. I can. I'm a wealthy man with powerful connections. Boone is a dirt farmer with nothing but debts. Who do you think a judge will believe? He tucked the paper back into his coat. I'm staying at the boarding house. You have 24 hours to make your decision. After that, I'm going to the sheriff. He tipped his hat to her, nodded at the gawking crowd, and walked away like he'd just concluded a successful business transaction. Evelyn stood frozen, Maisie's hand tight in hers, the whole world crashing down around her. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of Evelyn's life. Maisie kept asking questions she couldn't answer. Who was that man? What did he want? Why did he say those things about the baby? Evelyn just shook her head and kept the horse moving, her mind racing through possibilities and coming up empty every time. Silas was in the barn when they got back. He took one look at Evelyn's face and his whole body went tense. What happened? We need to talk. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaking. Inside. They left Maisie to unload the supplies and went into the house. Eli was reading by the fire, but Silas sent him outside with some excuse about checking the chicken coop. Then it was just the two of them, and Evelyn had to say the words that would destroy everything. My first husband is in Blackthorn Ridge, she said. He says our divorce was never properly filed. He says we're still legally married, and he's going to take me back to Virginia. Silas went very still. Say that again. She told him everything, the meeting at the store, the papers Caleb claimed to have, the threat against the ranch and the children. By the time she finished, Silas's hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. He can't do this, he said finally. He says he can. And if he has proof that the divorce wasn't legal, then we'll get proof that it was. Silas started pacing. We'll go to the county seat, pull the records ourselves, prove he's lying. What if he's not lying? Then we'll fight it anyway. He turned to face her.
I'm not letting him take you. I'm not letting him take our child. I don't care what the law says. He'll destroy you, Silas. He has money and connections, and he's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. Neither am I. Silas crossed to her, took her face in his hands. It was the most he'd touched her since the day they met. Listen to me. You are my wife. That baby is my child. I don't give a damn what some piece of paper says. You're staying here. Evelyn felt tears building behind her eyes. I can't let you lose everything because of me. You're not going to. His voice was fierce. I lost Helen because I was careless, because I didn't see how sick she was getting. I'm not losing you too. I won't allow it. How are we going to fight him? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He let go of her face but took her hands instead. Do you trust me? She wanted to, needed to, but trust was a luxury she'd lost years ago. I want to. Then start there. He squeezed her hands once and let go. I need to ride to the county seat, tonight, before he can file anything official. It's a hard ride. I won't be back until tomorrow evening at the earliest. Can you manage the ranch alone? Maisie and I can handle it. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except me or people you know. If Voss shows up here, I'll handle it. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was memorizing her face. Then he kissed her forehead, quick and awkward, and grabbed his coat. Silas, she called as he reached the door. He turned. Be careful. He nodded once and was gone. That night was the longest Evelyn could remember. She made supper for the children, trying to act normal while her mind spun in circles. Maisie watched her with sharp, worried eyes but didn't ask questions. Eli sensed the tension and went quiet, picking at his food. After the children were in bed, Evelyn sat by the fire and stared at the flames. She put her hand on her belly, feeling the small movements of the baby inside. This child that shouldn't exist, that Caleb now claimed was his, that had changed everything. She must have dozed off because she woke to pounding on the door. For a moment she was disoriented, fumbling in the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers. The pounding came again, harder this time. Mrs. Boone, open up, sheriff's business. Evelyn's heart kicked. She lit a lamp with shaking hands and went to the door, but didn't open it. What do you want? Need to speak with you, ma'am. Got a complaint filed about a custody matter. At midnight? Man who filed it is insistent. Says you're harboring property that belongs to him. The sheriff's voice was gruff, apologetic. Just open the door, Mrs. Boone. Make this easy. Property. He'd called her property. I'm not opening this door, Evelyn said. My husband's not here and I'm not speaking to anyone until he gets back. Ma'am, I can break this door down if I have to. Then you'll have to explain to Silas Boone why you broke his property while terrorizing his pregnant wife in the middle of the night. She kept her voice steady even though she was shaking. Come back tomorrow in daylight with proper papers, and maybe we'll talk. There was silence. Then the sheriff said, You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be. Good night, Sheriff. She heard him curse under his breath. Then footsteps retreating, then silence. Evelyn sat down hard on the floor, her back against the door, and tried to remember how to breathe. Who was that? She looked up. Maisie stood in the hallway, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her face pale in the lamplight. No one important, Evelyn lied. Was it that man from town? The one who said he was your husband? There was no point lying. Maisie was too smart for that. He sent the sheriff. He's trying to force me to go back to Virginia. Are you going to? No. But if he's your real husband, he's not. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet. He threw me away when he decided I wasn't good enough. He doesn't get to come back and claim me now just because it's convenient for him. Maisie stared at her. Then, in a small voice, Are you going to leave us? No, baby. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Evelyn crossed to her and pulled her into a hug. Maisie was stiff at first, then melted into it, her thin arms wrapping tight around Evelyn's waist. I promise, Evelyn said, and meant it with everything she had. Silas rode back into the ranch just after noon the next day, his horse lathered and exhausted. He had saddlebags full of papers and a look on his face that made Evelyn's stomach drop. Did you find proof? She asked. I found records. He dismounted stiffly, like the ride had cost him. But they're a mess.
The clerk who handled your divorce was old, half-blind, and he died 3 months ago. His replacement has been trying to sort through the backlog, and there are gaps everywhere. So Caleb was telling the truth. Maybe. Or maybe his lawyer just found a loophole big enough to drive a wagon through. Silas pulled out a sheaf of papers. I found the original petition for divorce. I found a letter from the judge granting it. What I couldn't find was the final registration with the county, which means, technically, legally, he might have a case. Evelyn felt the ground shift under her. So what do? We fight anyway. Silas looked exhausted but determined. I'm not a lawyer, but I know people. There's a retired judge in Pine Creek who owes me a favor. I'm going to see if he'll look at this, tell us what our options are. That could take weeks. I know. He handed her the papers. In the meantime, you stay on this ranch. Don't go to town, don't talk to Voss, don't let the sheriff bully you. If anyone tries to take you by force, you scream loud enough that everyone in the valley hears it. They came last night, Evelyn said quietly. The sheriff. Caleb sent him to try to get me to come out. Silas's expression went dark. Did he touch you? No, I wouldn't open the door, but he'll be back. Let him come. Silas's voice was cold. He steps foot on my property without cause, and I'll make sure he regrets it. That afternoon, word spread through Blackthorn Ridge like wildfire. The new Mrs. Boone was actually still married to someone else. The baby she was carrying might not belong to Silas. There was going to be a legal fight, and it was going to be ugly. Sarah Bennett showed up at the ranch the next morning with a basket of food and a fierce expression. I don't care what anyone says, she announced, pushing past Evelyn into the kitchen. Helen would want me to help you, and that's what I'm doing. Evelyn felt something break open in her chest. You don't have to... Yes, I do. That man in town is a snake, and everyone knows it. He shows up here after a year, claiming you're still his wife? After he threw you out? Sarah set down the basket with force. That's not how marriage works. That's not how anything works. Some people think he's right. Some people are idiots. Sarah started unpacking the basket. Bread, preserves, dried meat. You're Silas's wife. Everyone who matters knows that. The rest of them can hang. Evelyn started crying. She didn't mean to, didn't want to, but she couldn't help it. Sarah pulled her into a hug and let her sob, and it was the first real comfort she'd had from another woman in years. When she finally pulled herself together, Sarah said, What are you going to do? I don't know. Wait for Silas to figure something out, I guess. That might take too long. What if Voss forces the issue? What if he gets the sheriff to arrest Silas for kidnapping or adultery or some other nonsense? Evelyn hadn't thought of that. The fear must have shown on her face because Sarah gripped her shoulders. Listen to me. You need a plan. A real one. Something that doesn't depend on lawyers or judges or pieces of paper. Like what? Sarah hesitated, then she said, There's a woman in Pine Creek. She helps women who need to disappear. Gives them new names, new papers, sends them west or north where no one asks questions. If it comes to that, if Voss really does have the law on his side, you could go to her. And leave Silas and the children? Better than being dragged back to Virginia in chains. Evelyn shook her head. I can't run. Not again. I ran from Caleb the first time and look where it got me. If I run now, he'll just follow. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Then what? Then I fight. Evelyn wiped her eyes. I fight, and I hope it's enough. The confrontation came 3 days later. Caleb arrived at the ranch with the sheriff and 2 deputies, all of them armed. Evelyn watched from the window as they dismounted, as Caleb straightened his coat with that same arrogant precision he'd always had. Silas was in the barn. Evelyn sent Maisie to get him and then went to the door herself. Mrs. Mercer, Caleb said when she opened it, I believe we have business to conclude. It's Mrs. Boone. And no, we don't. The law says otherwise. He gestured to the sheriff. Show her. The sheriff pulled out a document, official-looking and stamped. This here's an injunction. Says you're to return to Virginia with Mr. Voss pending a full legal hearing on your marriage status. Judge's orders. What judge? Judge Whitmore in the county seat. Never heard of him? Doesn't matter if you've heard of him or not, ma'am. This is legal and binding. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, I know this is hard, but you need to come with us. No. Caleb stepped forward. Evelyn, don't make this worse than it needs to be. You're carrying my child. That gives me rights. If you resist, you'll only hurt yourself and the baby." "That's not your baby," Silas's voice cut across the yard. He came striding from the barn, his face set in stone. "And she's not going anywhere with you." "Mr. Boone," the sheriff held up a hand, "stay out of this. You're already in enough trouble." "Trouble?" Silas stopped a few feet from them. "For marrying a woman who was legally divorced?" "Except she wasn't." Caleb pulled out his papers. "I have documentation proving the divorce was never finalized, which means you've been living with another man's wife. That's adultery in Virginia. Could get you arrested." "Good thing we're not in Virginia." "The law has a long reach, Boone. Don't test it." They stared at each other, and Evelyn felt the moment stretching thin. Then Maisie's voice rang out from behind her. "He's lying." Everyone turned. Maisie stood in the doorway, holding a piece of paper, her face flushed. "He's lying about the baby. It can't be his." "Maisie," Silas started. "No, Pa, listen." She came forward, thrust the paper at the sheriff. "This is a letter from his new wife. Evelyn's friend Sarah got it from her cousin who works at the Virginia courthouse. It says Mr. Voss can't have children. It says his new wife found out about it from a doctor, and she's threatening to leave him unless he fixes the situation." Caleb's face went white, then red. "Where did you get that?" "Doesn't matter where I got it." Maisie's voice was steady, fierce. "What matters is it's true. You can't have babies. That's why you want Evelyn back. Not because she's your wife, because she's carrying proof that you're not the problem, but she's not going to give it to you." The sheriff was reading the letter, his expression growing more troubled. "Mr. Voss, is this accurate?" "That's private correspondence. Is it accurate?" Caleb's jaw worked. "My medical situation is irrelevant. The legal facts remain. She's my wife. That child is my responsibility." "Except the timing doesn't work," Silas said quietly. "Evelyn's been here for 6 months. We've been married for 5. She's 5 months pregnant, which means she conceived 3 months after your supposed divorce. Even if the paperwork wasn't filed properly, you haven't lived together in over half a year. How exactly is this baby yours?" The sheriff looked from Silas to Caleb to Evelyn. Then he folded the injunction and put it back in his pocket. "I think this needs more investigation before anyone goes anywhere." "Sheriff," Caleb started. "Mr. Voss, I'm not arresting anyone today. You got questions about your marriage. You take them up with a proper court. But I'm not dragging a pregnant woman off a ranch based on disputed paperwork and suspicious timing." He turned to his deputies. "Mount up." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but the sheriff's expression left no room for it. He turned to Evelyn instead, his face twisted with fury and something that looked like desperation. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." Evelyn stepped forward, put her hand protectively over her belly. "I don't belong to you anymore. I never really did. Go back to Virginia. Fix your own life. Leave mine alone." For a moment she thought he might actually refuse, might push his way into the house and try to take her by force. But the sheriff and his deputies were already leaving, and Silas was standing there like a wall, and Caleb wasn't stupid enough to start something he couldn't finish. He left, got on his horse and rode away, back toward town, and Evelyn watched him go with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. When the dust settled, Silas turned to Maisie. "Where did you really get that letter?" "Sarah brought it yesterday, said it might help." Maisie looked scared now that the adrenaline was fading. "Did I do the right thing?" Silas pulled her into a fierce hug. "You did perfect." That night, the whole family gathered by the fire. Eli was full of questions about what had happened, why the bad man had come, whether he was going to come back. Silas answered as honestly as he could while still keeping it simple enough for a 7-year-old to understand. "So Evelyn's staying?" Eli asked. "Yes." "And the baby's ours?" "Yes." "Good." Eli leaned against Evelyn's side. "I already made it a house. It would be sad if it didn't get to live here." Evelyn put her arm around him and pulled him close. Across the fire, Maisie was watching them, and for the first time since Evelyn had arrived, the girl was smiling. Just a little. Just enough. Later, after the children were asleep, Silas and Evelyn sat together in the main room. He'd built up the fire and they sat close to it, not quite touching, but closer than they'd been before. "He's going to come back," Evelyn said quietly. "The letter bought us time, but it didn't solve anything. I know. Silas stared into the flames. But now we know what we're really fighting. It's not about you. It's about him trying to save face, which makes him more dangerous. Maybe. Or maybe it gives us leverage. He looked at her. His new wife is threatening to leave him. His reputation is on the line. He's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind we can use against him. Silas's expression was hard. I'm not letting him take you, whatever it costs. Evelyn reached over and took his hand. He startled, like he'd forgotten what simple touch felt like. Then his fingers closed around hers, tight and warm. Thank you, she said, for fighting for me. For us. You're my wife, he said simply. What else would I do? They sat like that until the fire burned low, hands linked, facing whatever came next together. Caleb didn't leave Blackthorn Ridge. Evelyn knew because Sarah came by 3 days later with the news, her face tight with worry. He's still at the boarding house, Sarah said, unpacking another basket of supplies she'd insisted on bringing. Mrs. Hutchins says he's been sending telegrams back and forth to Virginia, lots of them. And he's been meeting with people, lawyers maybe, or men who look like they could cause trouble. Evelyn's hand stilled over the potatoes she was peeling. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves money changing hands and questions being asked. Sarah lowered her voice even though they were alone in the kitchen. Tom, my husband, he heard talk at the saloon. Voss has been buying drinks for miners, asking them questions about Silas, about the ranch, about how long you've been here. He's building a case. A case for what? I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not good. Sarah pulled out a sealed envelope. This came for you, came to our place actually. I think Voss intercepted your mail at the post office, so I had the postmaster redirect anything for you to us. Evelyn took the envelope with shaking hands. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat and precise. She opened it and read, her heart sinking with every line. It was from a lawyer in Virginia, Caleb's lawyer, by the looks of it. The letter detailed a lawsuit Caleb was filing, not just about the validity of the divorce, but about fraud, theft of property, and unlawful cohabitation. He was claiming that Evelyn had stolen personal items when she left, that she'd known the divorce wasn't finalized and had deliberately deceived Silas Boone, and that the child she was carrying was conceived during their marriage and therefore belonged to him under Virginia law. The letter ended with an offer. If Evelyn returned to Virginia voluntarily and acknowledged Caleb as the father of her child, he would drop all charges against both her and Silas. If she refused, he would pursue the case to its fullest extent and see them both destroyed. What does it say? Sarah asked. Evelyn handed her the letter. Sarah read it, her expression growing darker with each sentence. When she finished, she cursed in a way that would have made the miners blush. He's trying to blackmail you, Sarah said flatly. He's trying to save face. Evelyn sat down heavily. His new wife knows he's infertile. If word gets out, he'll be a laughingstock. Men like Caleb can survive almost anything except being seen as less than a man. If he can claim this baby as his, prove he can father a child, he wins. And if you refuse, then he destroys everything. The ranch, Silas's reputation, the children's stability, all of it. Evelyn put her head in her hands. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows I won't let that happen. So what are you going to do? Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she lifted her head and said, I'm going to talk to him. Are you insane? Probably. Evelyn stood up. But he wants something from me. That gives me leverage. Maybe I can negotiate something that doesn't end with everyone I care about being destroyed. And if he won't negotiate, then at least I'll know where we stand. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Evelyn's expression stopped her. Instead, she just said, Don't go alone, take Silas. No, this is between me and Caleb. It always has been. She left the next morning before Silas could stop her, taking the wagon into town with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The boarding house was easy to find. It was the only decent lodging in Blackthorn Ridge. Mrs. Hutchins was behind the desk, a thin woman with sharp eyes who looked at Evelyn like she was something unfortunate that had wandered in from the street. I'm here to see Caleb Voss, Evelyn said. He expecting you? No, but he'll see me. Mrs. Hutchins pursed her lips but went upstairs. A few minutes later, she returned and gestured for Evelyn to follow. The room was on the second floor, small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. Caleb stood by that window, his back to the door, and didn't turn when Evelyn entered. "Close the door," he said. She did. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Caleb turned around and looked at her properly for the first time since he'd arrived in Blackthorn Ridge. His eyes went to her belly, swollen and undeniable, and something complicated crossed his face. "You're bigger than I expected," he said. "I'm 6 months pregnant." "What did you expect?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he gestured to a chair. "Sit. You shouldn't be standing in your condition." "I'm fine standing." Sit, Evelyn. His voice had that edge it used to get when he was trying to control his temper. "Please." She sat, more because her back was aching than because he'd asked. Caleb remained standing, arms crossed, looking at her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. "You got my letter," he said finally. "I did." And I want to know what you really want. Not the legal nonsense, not the threats. What do you actually want from me? Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want my life back. The life I had before you ruined it." "I didn't ruin anything. You threw me away like I was garbage. Because my mother convinced me you were defective, that the problem was you." He turned back to the window. "She was wrong. I was the problem. I am the problem. And now my new wife knows it, and she's threatening to leave me unless I can prove otherwise. So you want to steal my baby to save your marriage. It's not stealing if the child is legally mine. Except it's not legally yours. It's Silas's. Conceived after I left Virginia, after I married him, after I built a new life here. The courts won't see it that way if the divorce wasn't finalized. Then we'll fight it in court. And lose." Caleb turned back to face her. "I have money, Evelyn. I have lawyers. I have connections in 3 states. Boone has a failing ranch and debts he can barely service. Who do you think wins that fight? Maybe neither of us." "Meaning?" Evelyn took a breath and played the only card she had left. "Meaning, if you push this, I'll tell everyone the truth. Every newspaper in Virginia, every business associate you have, every person in your social circle. I'll tell them you're infertile, that you threw me out for being barren when you were the problem all along. That you're so desperate to hide it, you're trying to steal another man's child and pass it off as your own." Caleb's face went white. "You wouldn't. Try me." Evelyn leaned forward. "You think you're the only one who can destroy lives? I've got nothing left to lose, Caleb. You already took everything from me once. I'm not letting you do it again. So if you want a war, we'll have a war. But it's going to cost you everything you have left." They stared at each other across the small room. Then Caleb laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "You've changed." "I had to. The old Evelyn would never have threatened me like that. The old Evelyn is dead. You killed her when you threw her out." She stood up, her back protesting. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop this lawsuit. You're going to stop harassing me and my family. You're going to go back to Virginia and find another way to fix your marriage. And in exchange, I won't destroy your reputation. And if I refuse, then we both lose. You lose your standing in Virginia society. I lose my family here. Everyone suffers. Is that really what you want?" Caleb was silent for so long that Evelyn thought he might actually call her bluff. Then he said, "There's a third option." "What's that?" "I don't drop the lawsuit, but I lose it, publicly, loudly, in a way that makes it clear I was wrong about everything." He met her eyes. "My lawyer files the case, we go to court, and your husband's lawyer, assuming you can find one, presents evidence that the divorce was legitimate, that you left Virginia in good faith, that the child is his. The judge rules in your favor. I lose. Publicly. And everyone knows I was the one who made a mistake." Evelyn stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because it solves both our problems." Caleb sat down across from her. "I'd go home and tell my wife I tried everything to prove I could father a child, but the courts ruled against me. I did my best, but the law failed me. She can't blame me for that. And you get legal protection, a court ruling that your marriage to Boone is legitimate, that the child is his, that I have no claim. Everyone wins. Except you lose face. I lose face either way. This way I lose it in a courtroom where I can control the narrative rather than in newspapers where I can't." He leaned forward. "I'm not a good man, Evelyn. I know that. I treated you terribly and I'm sorry for it, but I'm practical. and this is the practical solution. Evelyn wanted to argue, to find the trap in his offer, but she was tired and pregnant and scared, and this felt like the best option she was going to get. How do I know you'll actually lose? That you won't bribe the judge or find some way to win anyway? You don't. You have to trust me. I don't trust you. Then trust that I'm more afraid of my wife leaving me than I am of losing a court case. His voice was flat, honest. If Lenora leaves, I'm ruined socially. Divorced men are pariahs in Virginia. But if I fight for my supposed rights and lose honorably, I'm just unlucky. People sympathize with unlucky. It was twisted logic, but it made sense. In its own horrible way, it actually made sense. I need to talk to Silas, Evelyn said. You have until tomorrow. After that, I'm filing the lawsuit whether you agree or not. Evelyn stood to leave, but Caleb's voice stopped her at the door. For what it's worth, he said, I am sorry. For what I did to you. For what my mother said. You deserve better. She turned to look at him. He was staring at his hands, and he looked older than she remembered. Tired. Human. Yes, she said. I did. She left before he could say anything else. The ride back to the ranch was cold and her thoughts were spinning. When she pulled up to the house, Silas was waiting on the porch, his face like thunder. Where the hell have you been? He demanded. In town, talking to Caleb. You what? He came down the steps so fast she thought he might actually grab her. Are you insane? What if he'd hurt you? What if he'd taken you somewhere? He didn't. I'm fine. She climbed down from the wagon, wincing as her back protested. And I think I found a solution. She told him everything. About the letter, about the meeting, about Caleb's offer to lose the lawsuit publicly. Silas listened with his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. You want to trust him, he said when she finished. The man who threw you out and is now trying to steal your child. You want to trust him. I don't trust him, but I trust that he's desperate enough to make this work. She put her hand on his arm. Think about it, Silas. If we fight this on our own, we might lose. We probably will lose. But if he agrees to lose publicly, we get a court order saying this baby is yours, that our marriage is legitimate. We get protection. Or we walk into a trap and lose everything anyway. That's possible, but what choice do we have? She was pleading now, exhausted. We can't win a legal fight against him. We don't have the money or the connections. This might be our only chance. Silas pulled away from her, paced to the edge of the porch and back. I don't like it. Neither do I, but I like the alternative even less. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the frozen landscape. Then he said, If we do this, we need a real lawyer. Someone who can make sure Voss actually follows through. The retired judge you mentioned, the one who owes you a favor. Judge Crawford. He lives in Pine Creek. Silas nodded slowly. If anyone can navigate this, it's him, but we'd need to move fast. If Voss is filing tomorrow, I'll ride to Pine Creek tonight. Like hell you will. You're 6 months pregnant and it's freezing out there. He turned to face her. I'll go. You stay here with the kids. Silas, I'm not arguing about this, Evelyn. You've done enough. Let me handle the rest. She wanted to fight him, to insist she could do it herself, but the truth was she was exhausted. The ride to town had worn her out more than she wanted to admit, so she nodded and let him take charge. He left within the hour, bundled against the cold, his saddlebags packed with the documents they had. Evelyn watched him ride away and then went inside to face Maisie and Eli, who'd been watching everything from the window. Is Pa going to fix it? Eli asked. He's going to try. What if he can't? Evelyn knelt down so she was eye level with him. Then we'll figure out something else. But your Pa is the smartest, stubbornest man I've ever met. If anyone can fix this, it's him. Eli seemed satisfied with that. But Maisie was watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. You went to see him, didn't you? Maisie said. That man who says he's your husband. Yes. Why? Because I needed to understand what he really wanted, and I needed him to understand that I wasn't going to give up without a fight. Are you scared? Evelyn wanted to lie, to tell her everything would be fine, but Maisie was too smart for that. Yes, she admitted. I'm terrified. Good. Maisie's expression was fierce. You should be scared. That means you care about staying here, about staying with us. Of course I care.
Mama used to say people who aren't scared aren't paying attention. Maisie's voice went quiet. She was scared a lot toward the end. I think she knew something bad was going to happen. But she pretended everything was fine because she didn't want us to worry. Evelyn pulled her into a hug. I'm not pretending. I'm scared, and I'm telling you I'm scared. But I'm also telling you that I'm going to fight. For you, for Eli, for your father, for this baby. I'm going to fight with everything I have. Maisie held on tight. Promise? I promise. That night, the three of them huddled together by the fire. Evelyn told stories until Eli fell asleep against her side. Maisie stayed awake longer, helping her with small tasks around the house, not talking much, but present in a way that felt like solidarity. When Maisie finally went to bed, Evelyn sat alone and put her hand on her belly. The baby was moving, small flutters that felt like hope, or maybe warning. Please, she whispered to the empty room, please let this work. Silas returned the next evening with Judge Crawford in tow. The judge was an older man, maybe 60, with white hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat at their kitchen table and went through every document they had, making notes in cramped handwriting. This is a mess, he said finally. Can you fix it? Silas asked. Maybe. If Voss is serious about losing publicly, I can make sure he loses in a way that protects you legally. But I need to meet with him first, see what he's really offering. Crawford looked at Evelyn. You trust him to follow through? No, but I think he's desperate enough to try. Desperation makes men unpredictable. So does having nothing left to lose, Evelyn pointed out, and that's where we are. Crawford smiled slightly. Fair point. He stood up. I'll meet with Voss tomorrow. If he's willing to put his offer in writing, I'll take the case. If not, you need to start thinking about alternatives. Like what? Silas asked. Like running. Or fighting dirty. Neither option is good, but they're better than waiting for him to destroy you. That night, after Crawford had settled into the barn and the children were asleep, Silas and Evelyn sat together in their bedroom. He'd been sleeping in the house regularly now, though they still kept to their own sides of the bed. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. For what? For not protecting you better. For not seeing this coming. How could you have seen it coming? I didn't even know my divorce wasn't finalized. Still, you came here for safety, and I've brought you nothing but trouble. Evelyn rolled onto her side to face him. You've brought me a home, a family, children who are starting to love me. That's not nothing. It's also not enough. Not if Voss wins. Then we make sure he doesn't win. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. We're in this together now, for better or worse. Isn't that what the preacher said? Silas looked down at their joined hands. Then he lifted hers and kissed her knuckles, quick and awkward. I'm not good at this. The marriage thing, the feelings thing. Helen was patient with me, but I'm not Helen, and I don't need you to be good at feelings. I just need you to be honest. Then honestly, I'm terrified of losing you, both of you. His hand moved to rest on her belly. I never thought I'd have this again. Another child. Another chance. And now that I do, the thought of it being taken away, it won't be. We won't let it. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. They lay there in the dark, hands linked across the small distance between them, and Evelyn felt the weight of everything pressing down. Judge Crawford met with Caleb the next day and returned with news that was somehow both better and worse than expected. He's willing to put it in writing, Crawford said, laying out a formal agreement on the kitchen table. He'll file the lawsuit. We'll present evidence. He'll lose. The court will rule that your marriage to Boone is legitimate, that the child is his, and that Voss has no claim. Clean and legal. What's the catch? Silas asked. The catch is timing. He wants this resolved before the baby is born, which means we have maybe 6 weeks to prepare, go to trial, and get a ruling. 6 weeks? Evelyn felt panic rising. I'm due in 8 weeks. What if... Then we work fast. Crawford looked grim. I've already sent word to the circuit judge. He's agreed to an expedited hearing, but you need to understand, this only works if Voss actually follows through. If he changes his mind, if his lawyer finds some new angle to exploit, this whole thing falls apart. So we're trusting him, Silas said flatly. We're trusting that his fear of his wife outweighs his pride. Yes. It was a thin thread to hang everything on, but it was all they had.
The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Crawford worked with them constantly, going over testimony, preparing documents, coaching Evelyn on what to say and what not to say. Sarah brought witnesses, people who could testify that Evelyn had been living at the Boone Ranch since her arrival, that the marriage was genuine, that Silas had been a good husband. Even Grace from the general store agreed to testify about when Evelyn first arrived in Blackthorn Ridge. Through it all, Caleb stayed in town, a dark shadow hanging over everything. Evelyn saw him once from a distance, getting into a hired carriage, and their eyes met across the street. He nodded once, a strange acknowledgement, and then he was gone. The trial was set for the second week of March in the county courthouse, a 3-hour ride from Blackthorn Ridge. Silas wanted Evelyn to stay home, but she refused. "This is about me," she said. "I'm going to be there. You're 7 months pregnant and it's still freezing outside. I don't care, I need to do this." They argued about it for days until finally Crawford intervened. "Let her come," he said. "The judge will want to see her anyway. And honestly, a pregnant woman fighting for her family is more sympathetic than any testimony I could give." So Evelyn went, bundled in blankets in the back of a wagon, with Silas driving and Crawford beside him. Maisie and Eli stayed with Sarah, who'd promised to keep them safe and distracted. The ride was brutal, cold and bumpy and endless. By the time they reached the courthouse, Evelyn's back was screaming and she could barely walk. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, wood-paneled and drafty, with benches for spectators and a raised platform for the judge. Caleb was already there with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. When Caleb saw Evelyn, he stood up automatically, then seemed to catch himself and sat back down. The judge arrived, a stern-faced man named Holloway, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He banged his gavel once, and the room fell silent. "This is a petition regarding the validity of a divorce and the legitimacy of a subsequent marriage," Judge Holloway said. "Mr. Voss, you're claiming the divorce between yourself and Mrs. Mercer was never properly finalized." "Yes, Your Honor," Caleb's lawyer said smoothly. "We have documentation showing that while the petition was filed and granted, the final registration was never completed. Therefore, my client maintains that he and Mrs. Mercer are still legally married." "And you're seeking what, exactly?" "Custody of the unborn child and the return of Mrs. Mercer to Virginia." Judge Holloway looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Boone, I assume you dispute this claim." Crawford stood up. "We do, Your Honor. We have evidence that the divorce was completed in good faith, that Mrs. Mercer left Virginia believing herself to be legally divorced, and that her subsequent marriage to Mr. Boone is entirely legitimate. Furthermore, the timing of the pregnancy makes it clear that the child was conceived after Mrs. Mercer's departure from Virginia and after her marriage to Mr. Boone." "Then let's see this evidence." What followed was the strangest performance Evelyn had ever witnessed. Crawford presented documents, the original divorce petition, letters proving when Evelyn had arrived in Blackthorn Ridge, testimony from witnesses establishing the timeline. Caleb's lawyer cross-examined, but his heart didn't seem to be in it. He asked questions that Crawford easily deflected. He raised objections that the judge quickly overruled. It was, Evelyn realized, exactly what Caleb had promised, a public fight that he was designed to lose. Then Caleb himself took the stand. His lawyer asked him about the marriage, about the divorce, about his reasons for seeking custody. And Caleb gave answers that were technically correct, but carefully worded to make him look reasonable while undermining his own case. "I believe the divorce was never finalized," he said, "but I can see now that I was mistaken. The paperwork may have been delayed, but the intent was clear. Mrs. Mercer left in good faith." "And the child?" his lawyer asked. "Looking at the timeline, it's clear the child was conceived after she left Virginia. I was confused about the dates, but Mr. Crawford has shown me the evidence and I accept his conclusions." It was masterful, really. Caleb was admitting defeat while framing it as a misunderstanding rather than malice. Saving face while giving Evelyn everything she needed. When it was Evelyn's turn to testify, she was shaking so badly she could barely climb into the witness box. Crawford asked her gentle questions. When she'd left Virginia, why she'd left, when she'd married Silas. She answered honestly, her voice steady despite her fear. Then Caleb's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. "Mrs. Boone,
Were you aware at the time you left Virginia that your divorce might not have been properly finalized? No, I believed it was complete. And yet you remarried very quickly, within weeks of arriving in Blackthorn Ridge. I needed a home. Mr. Boone needed help with his children. It was a practical arrangement. An arrangement that conveniently resulted in a pregnancy. Crawford was on his feet. Objection. Relevance?
Sustained, Judge Holloway said, but he was looking at Evelyn thoughtfully. The lawyer tried a few more questions, but Crawford blocked each one. Finally, he sat down, and Evelyn was allowed to step down. The judge called for closing arguments. Crawford spoke eloquently about good faith efforts and innocent mistakes. Caleb's lawyer argued that his client had been wronged, but admitted the evidence was against them. It was all very civil, very proper, and completely staged. Judge Holloway deliberated for maybe 5 minutes. Then he banged his gavel. I find that the divorce between Mr. Voss and Mrs. Mercer was completed in good faith and is legally valid. Mrs. Mercer's subsequent marriage to Mr. Boone is legitimate. The unborn child is the legal child of Mr. and Mrs. Boone. Mr. Voss's petition is denied. The gavel came down again, final and absolute. Evelyn's legs gave out. Silas caught her, held her up, and she buried her face in his shoulder and shook with relief so intense it felt like drowning. They'd won. The baby was safe. The marriage was safe. Everything was safe. Across the courtroom, Caleb stood up. He looked at Evelyn one last time, nodded once, and walked out. His lawyer followed, already packing up papers. And just like that, it was over. Judge Crawford clapped Silas on the shoulder. Congratulations. You're officially married with full legal protection. Thank you, Silas said roughly, for everything. Thank your wife. She's the one who had the courage to face him down. Crawford turned to Evelyn. You did good, Mrs. Boone. Mrs. Boone. It sounded real now. Official. They stayed in town that night. Evelyn was too exhausted to make the journey home. Silas rented a room at a small inn, and they lay together in the dark, not sleeping, just holding each other. It's really over, Evelyn whispered. It's really over. I can't believe he actually followed through. Neither can I. Silas's arm tightened around her. But I'm not questioning it. We won. That's all that matters. The baby kicked, hard, like it was celebrating too. Evelyn laughed, slightly hysterical, and pressed Silas's hand to her belly so he could feel it. Strong, he said, wonder in his voice. Like its mother, Evelyn said, like both its parents. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the fear finally beginning to fade. The ride back to Blackthorn Ridge took most of the next day, and by the time they pulled up to the ranch, Evelyn was so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. But Maisie and Eli were waiting on the porch, and the moment they saw the wagon, they came running. Did you win? Eli shouted. Did Pa win? We won, Silas said, climbing down stiffly. It's over. Maisie threw her arms around Evelyn before she could even get off the wagon, nearly knocking her over. You're staying. You're really staying. I'm really staying. Evelyn hugged her back, this fierce little girl who'd fought so hard to keep her mother's memory alive and was now fighting just as hard to make room for something new. That night they celebrated with a proper dinner, chicken that Sarah had brought over, potatoes, bread that actually rose right, and even a dried apple pie that Maisie had made herself. They ate until they were stuffed, and for the first time since Evelyn had arrived at the ranch, the house felt full. Not just with people, but with something warmer, something that felt like family. Tell us about the trial, Eli begged. Was there a real judge? Did he have a wig like in the picture books? No wig, Silas said, smiling slightly. Just a grumpy old man with a gavel. Did you have to fight? Did Pa punch that bad man? No fighting, just talking. Lots and lots of boring talking. Eli looked disappointed. That doesn't sound exciting. It was plenty exciting, Evelyn said. Trust me. Later, after the children were in bed, Silas and Evelyn sat together by the fire. The house was quiet, except for the crack and pop of burning wood. Evelyn's feet were swollen and aching, propped up on a stool. Silas had insisted, even though she'd argued she was fine. I've been thinking, he said after a while. About what? About how I've treated you. This whole marriage. He stared into the fire. I asked you to help me with the kids, to keep the house running, to be practical. I never asked what you needed. You gave me a home when I had nothing. That was enough. No, it wasn't. He turned to look at her. You deserved more than just shelter and food. You deserved to be treated like a person, not a solution to a problem. Silas, let me finish. He ran his hands through his hair. Helen and I, we loved each other. Really loved each other. When she died, I thought that was it. That I'd had my chance at that kind of happiness, and I'd lost it. So when I married you, I told myself this was different, practical, an arrangement. It was easier that way, safer. If I didn't let myself care too much, it couldn't hurt as much if something went wrong. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. And now I realize I'm an idiot. He smiled, but it was sad. Because somewhere along the way, I started caring anyway. When Voss showed up, when he threatened to take you away, I didn't just think about losing help with the kids or someone to cook. I thought about losing you, and that terrified me more than anything has in a long time. I was terrified too. I know. And you faced it anyway. You went into town alone to confront him. You sat in that courtroom and fought for this family. You're braver than I ever was. He reached over and took her hand. I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel. Helen used to get frustrated with me about it. But I want you to know you're not just practical to me anymore. You're my wife, really my wife. And I want to try to be a real husband, if you'll let me. Evelyn's eyes burned with tears. I'd like that. Even though I'm stubborn and I work too much and I don't talk about my feelings, especially because of all that. She squeezed his hand. You're human, Silas, messy and imperfect and trying your best, just like me, just like everyone. That's all anyone can ask for. He pulled her close then, awkward because of her belly, but determined, and kissed her. It was their first real kiss. Not the quick peck at their wedding, but something genuine. Something that felt like a beginning rather than an obligation. When they pulled apart, Evelyn was crying and laughing at the same time. I love you, she said. I don't know when it happened, but I do. I love you too. He said it quietly, like the words were fragile. I should have said it sooner. You're saying it now. That's what matters. They sat together until the fire burned low, and when they finally went to bed, Silas held her through the night like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. The baby came 3 weeks later, on a night when the worst blizzard of the season was howling outside. Evelyn's water broke just after supper, and within an hour the pains were coming so fast she couldn't catch her breath between them. Get Sarah, she gasped to Silas. Get Sarah right now. He was out the door before she finished the sentence, riding through snow so thick he could barely see. Maisie took charge immediately, boiling water, gathering clean cloths, helping Evelyn into the bedroom. Eli stood in the doorway looking terrified until Maisie snapped at him to make himself useful and keep the fire going. It's too early, Evelyn said through clenched teeth. The baby's not supposed to come yet. Babies come when they want to come, Maisie said, but her voice was shaking. Mama used to say that. Maisie, I'm scared. I know, me too. The girl grabbed her hand and held on tight. But you're strong. You can do this. Sarah arrived what felt like hours later, but was probably only 40 minutes, her coat covered in snow, her bag of supplies clutched in her arms. She took one look at Evelyn and started giving orders like a general. Silas, get out. Maisie, I need more hot water. Eli, go sit with your father and stay out of the way. The labor was brutal. Evelyn had heard stories about childbirth, but nothing prepared her for the reality of it. The pain that came in waves so intense, she couldn't think, couldn't breathe, could only endure. She screamed, she cursed, she begged for it to stop. Sarah stayed calm through all of it, checking her progress, telling her when to push, when to rest. I can't, Evelyn sobbed at one point. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. You're almost there. Sarah wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. One more push, come on. Evelyn pushed with everything she had left, and suddenly there was a release, a moment of shocking emptiness, and then a sound that made her heart stop. A cry, loud and angry and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, Sarah said, laughing. A healthy baby girl. She placed the baby on Evelyn's chest, this tiny squirming thing covered in blood and vernix, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to open. Evelyn looked down at her daughter and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. The door burst open and Silas stumbled in, his face white with fear. Are you? We're fine. Evelyn was crying again, but she was smiling. We're both fine. Come meet your daughter. He crossed to the bed like he was in a dream. When he saw the baby, his whole face crumpled. She's so small. She's perfect. He reached out with one rough, work-scarred finger, and the baby grabbed it with her tiny fist. Silas made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She's strong. Of course she is. She's ours. Maisie and Eli crept into the room then, their eyes huge. Can we see? Maisie whispered. Come here, Evelyn said. They approached slowly, reverently. Eli stared at the baby like she was a miracle. She's really little. You were that little once, Silas said. Can I hold her? Maisie asked. Sit down first. Maisie sat carefully on the edge of the bed and Evelyn placed the baby in her arms. The girl looked down at her new sister with an expression of such fierce protectiveness it made Evelyn's chest ache. Hi, Maisie said softly. I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything. Eli leaned against her shoulder. I'm your brother. I built you a house, but it fell down. I'll build you a better one. They stayed like that for a long time, this strange patchwork family, gathered around the newest member. And Evelyn looked at them, at Silas with tears on his face, at Maisie holding the baby like she was made of glass, at Eli already planning elaborate toys to build, and realized this was what she'd been searching for all along. Not perfection, not a life without problems, just people who chose to stay, even when things got hard. What are we going to name her? Silas asked. They'd discussed it before, tentatively, but never settled on anything. Eli had wanted to name her after their mother, Helen. But looking at Maisie now, Evelyn knew that wasn't right. This baby wasn't a replacement for anyone. She was her own person, coming into a family that had learned how to make room for new love, without forgetting old love. What about Rose? Evelyn said. For new beginnings. Silas smiled. Rose Boone. I like it. Rose Helen Boone, Maisie said suddenly. So she has a piece of Mama, too. But she's still her own person. Evelyn looked at Silas. He nodded, his eyes wet. Rose Helen Boone it is. The blizzard raged for 2 more days, and they were trapped inside the house. But it didn't feel like being trapped. It felt like being cocooned. Safe. The family took turns holding Rose, feeding her, changing her, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. Evelyn recovered slowly, her body aching but whole. Sarah checked on her constantly, making sure there was no fever, no excessive bleeding, no signs of the complications that had killed Helen. You did good, Sarah said on the second day. Both of you are healthy, strong. You're going to be fine. Thank you for everything. Evelyn took her hand. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. Sarah squeezed back. You're part of this valley now, Evelyn, part of this community. We take care of our own. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was transformed. Snow covered everything in a blanket so white it hurt to look at, and the sun came out for the first time in weeks, making everything sparkle. Silas bundled up and went to check on the livestock while Maisie helped Evelyn with Rose. The baby was already nursing well, already settling into a rhythm. She's easier than Eli was, Maisie observed. Mama said he cried all the time for the first month. Every baby is different. Do you think Mama would have liked you? The question was sudden, vulnerable. Evelyn thought about it carefully. I don't know, maybe not. But I think she would have been glad that you and Eli had someone who loves you, that your father found someone to help carry the weight. I hated you when you first came here, Maisie admitted. I wanted you to fail. I wanted Pa to send you away so things could go back to how they were before. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. You were protecting your mother's memory. That's not something to apologize for. Evelyn shifted Rose to her other arm. Your mother was important. What she meant to this family is important. I'm not trying to erase that. I'm just trying to add something new alongside it. I think Mama would understand that. Maisie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you didn't go back to Virginia with that awful man. Me too. And I'm glad Rose is here, even though she's loud and she smells weird and she wakes me up at night. Evelyn laughed. She'll get better at sleeping eventually. She better. I need my rest. It was such a normal complaint, Such a sibling thing to say that Evelyn felt her eyes sting with tears. Maisie noticed and made a face. Why are you crying? I didn't say anything sad. I'm just happy. That's a weird reason to cry. You'll understand when you're older. Maisie rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Over the next few weeks, life at the Boone Ranch settled into a new normal. Rose demanded constant attention, feeding, changing, soothing when she cried in the middle of the night. Evelyn was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced, but it was a good exhaustion, a purposeful one. Silas helped more than she'd expected, walking Rose around the house at 2 a.m. when she wouldn't settle, changing diapers without complaint. Watching her with an expression of such tender wonder, it made Evelyn fall in love with him all over again. Maisie was a surprisingly good helper, showing Eli how to hold the baby properly, singing to her the same songs their mother had sung to them. Eli was more cautious but devoted, building elaborate structures out of blocks and declaring they were presents for when Rose got older. Word spread through Blackthorn Ridge about the birth, and neighbors started showing up with gifts, quilts, knitted baby clothes, jars of preserves. Women who'd whispered about Evelyn before now came to admire Rose and offer advice. Grace brought a carved wooden rattle that her husband had made. Sarah brought enough food to feed them for a week. People are finally accepting you, Sarah said one afternoon, watching as another neighbor departed with promises to visit again soon. I think they just like babies, Evelyn said. Maybe, but you've also proved yourself. You stood up to your ex-husband. You fought for your family. You survived childbirth in a blizzard. That earns respect out here. I didn't do it for respect. I know. That's why you've earned it. March turned to April, and the snow began to melt. The ranch came back to life. Chickens laying eggs again, the cow producing milk, green shoots appearing in the garden. Silas worked from dawn to dusk, making up for the time he'd lost during the winter. And Evelyn could see the ranch slowly transforming. Fences got repaired, the barn roof got patched properly, the house got small improvements, new hinges on doors, glass in a window that had been boarded over, a proper shelf for storing dishes. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Silas said, "We're going to be all right." The ranch? Everything. The ranch, the family, us. He had Rose cradled in one arm, already asleep despite the noise of Maisie and Eli playing in the yard. For a while there, I didn't think we would be. But we're stronger than we were. All of us. We survived. More than that, we grew. He looked at her. You grew. When you first got here, you were so defeated. Like you'd given up on believing good things could happen. I had given up. And now? Evelyn thought about it. Now I know that good things come with hard things attached, that nothing is perfect, but that doesn't mean it's not worth having. She gestured to the yard where Maisie was teaching Eli some complicated clapping game. This isn't a fairy tale. We're not going to live happily ever after without problems. There will be bad harvests and sick animals and arguments and days when everything feels impossible. But we'll face them together, and that makes all the difference. Silas leaned over and kissed her forehead. When did you get so wise? When I realized I had something worth fighting for. In late April, Sarah came by with unexpected news. Caleb Voss left Virginia, she said, settling into a chair in the kitchen while Evelyn nursed Rose. My cousin sent word. Apparently his wife divorced him anyway when she found out about the trial. Said she couldn't trust a man who'd try to steal another woman's baby. He's been shunned from most of his social circles. Last anyone heard, he was heading west. California, maybe. Evelyn felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that he was truly gone. Pity for what he'd lost. And underneath it all, a kind of satisfaction that the man who'd tried to destroy her had destroyed himself instead. I almost feel sorry for him, she said. Don't. Sarah's voice was firm. He made his choices. He hurt people because he was too proud to admit his own failures. What happened to him is justice, not tragedy. Still, he gave me the baby, indirectly. If he hadn't thrown me out, I never would have come here, never would have met Silas, never would have had Rose. You're too generous. Most people would just be glad he's gone. I am glad he's gone. But I can be glad and still acknowledge that sometimes bad things lead to good things. Not because the bad things were good, but because people can build something better out of the wreckage. Sarah smiled. You really have changed. I had to. The old Evelyn wouldn't have survived out here. That night, Evelyn told Silas about Caleb leaving Virginia. He listened without comment, his face unreadable. When she finished, he said, "Do you regret it? Marrying him the first time?" "I regret the pain, the wasted years, the way he made me feel about myself." She shifted Rose to her shoulder to burp her. "But I don't regret the path that led me here. Every bad choice, every hard moment, they all brought me to this family. So no, I don't regret it." "Good." He pulled her close. "Because I'm not letting you go. Ever. Even when I'm old and gray and my back hurts and I complain about the cold? Especially then." She laughed and kissed him, and Rose made a sound of protest at being squished between them. Summer came to Blackthorn Ridge with a vengeance, turning the world green and hot. The ranch flourished under Silas's careful management and Evelyn's stubborn determination to make things grow. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so they started trading with neighbors. The chickens laid eggs steadily. The cow had a calf that Eli immediately claimed as his own. Rose grew impossibly fast, changing almost daily. She started smiling at 2 months, laughing at 3, reaching for things at 4. Maisie was constantly making her toys, cloth dolls, rattles made from dried gourds, soft balls stuffed with wool. Eli read to her from his books, even though she was too young to understand, convinced that it would make her smart. Evelyn's body recovered slowly from the pregnancy and birth. She'd lost some of the weight, but not all of it, and she found she didn't care the way she once would have. This body had carried a child through a difficult winter, had stood up to a man who'd tried to break her, had worked from dawn to dusk building a life from nothing. It was strong. It was enough. One afternoon in July, she caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized herself. Her hair was longer, tied back in a practical braid. Her face was tanned from working outside. Her hands were calloused and scarred. She looked nothing like the woman who'd arrived in Blackthorn Ridge, scared and defeated. She looked like someone who belonged. That evening, the whole family gathered outside to watch the sunset. It had become a tradition, sitting on the porch or in the yard, just being together as the day ended. Rose was on a blanket, kicking her legs and making happy noises. Maisie and Eli were playing some elaborate game involving sticks and rocks. Silas sat on the porch steps, whittling something that might have been a toy or might have been nothing in particular. Evelyn sat beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For giving me a chance when no one else would. For seeing past what I looked like or what I couldn't do. For making me part of this family. You made yourself part of this family. I just opened the door. Still, thank you." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for loving my children like they're yours. They are mine, all of them." She watched Maisie pick up Rose, who immediately grabbed a fistful of her sister's hair and yanked. Maisie yelped, but she was laughing. "This whole messy, imperfect, beautiful family, they're all mine." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here, about Caleb and his cruelty, about the desperate decision to head west, about the practical marriage that had become something real, about the baby they said she could never have, now sleeping peacefully on her sister's lap. She'd spent years believing she was broken, too big, too barren, too much of a burden to be worth keeping. And maybe, by the standards of people like Caleb and his mother, she was. But out here, in this harsh, beautiful valley, she'd learned that worth wasn't measured in what you looked like or whether you fit someone else's idea of perfection. Worth was measured in what you could endure, in what you'd fight for, in whether you showed up every day and tried your best, even when your best wasn't enough. She wasn't perfect. She never would be. She still got tired, still doubted herself, still had days when the old fears crept back in. But she had a family who loved her anyway, who'd chosen her, who'd fought for her when she needed it most. And that was more than enough. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." "We're the lucky ones. I don't know where we'd be without you." Evelyn smiled and watched her children play in the fading light. This family she'd built from the wreckage of her old life. Not a fairy tale. Not perfect. Just real and messy and worth every hard moment it had taken to get here. Years later, when Rose was old enough to ask questions, she'd want to know how her mother and father had fallen in love. Evelyn would tell her the truth, that it hadn't been love at first sight or some grand romantic gesture. It had been practical necessity that turned into partnership, that turned into respect, that turned into love. It had been choosing each other every day, even on the days when choosing each other was hard. She'd tell Rose about the husband who'd thrown her away and the man who'd taken her in, about the children who'd learned to trust again and the baby born in a blizzard, about the fight that nearly destroyed them and the family that emerged stronger on the other side. And she'd tell her that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when everything falls